everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Healing Home. I am your host, Michelle, and today I am joined by Ash Ritter of Black Sage Botanicals, and I cannot be more excited to talk with this woman because I've been following her on the good old Instagram, and man, she is a woman of many talents. I love her vibe. I love what she's doing. I love her work with Amanita and flying ointments. Plants of the desert was another thing that stood out to me that she's all up to. So I'm just like really excited to see where we can go. Conversation. And from her bio, Ash Ritter is a West Coast born, desert dwelling ethnobotanist, educator, writer, multi-disciplinary, animist, and poet in disguise as an herbalist. For 23 years and counting, Ash continues to reverently devote her life to fungal and botanical studies encompassing traditional, academic, clinical, and directly relational terrains. Ash, she offers public and private classes, herbal consultations, one-on-one mentorships, handcrafted remedies, herbal candy, and more through her website, blacksagebotanicals.org. So without further ado, help me in welcoming Ash to our stream, and hopefully we unmute here. I'm unmuting your mic. Here we are. Hi, Ash.
Hi. It's happening.
It is. Welcome. Welcome to the land of internet delays and your lovely face. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, how's your day going so far?
Today's good. Just another day in a hot, crispy critter paradise out here. Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to share.
Nice. Thank you so much. I want to allow people to get to know you a little more. I know I introduced you, but if there's anything you want to start our interview off with, please do so. You have the floor. And I'd love to hear just how you'd like to introduce yourself.
Oh, gosh, that's a funny one. I mean, the bio is kind of a meandering good way to start. I definitely feel like I'm a poet in disguise as an herbalist and an ethnobotanist. I feel like, well, first of all, I can explain ethnobotany for those who may not yet know. In my eyes and in my heart is the study of the relationship between people, plants, and fungi. And I'm kind of a history nerd, so the fun for me is studying history through the lens of plants and through the lens of fungi and how we've been commingling for ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. So that's what really excites me. But of course, I also practice as an herbalist, and but I love teaching and I love writing, and I just love staying curious and remystifying, kind of more so than demystifying in a way. You know what I mean? So it's the both and of it. But yeah, I basically just love plants and fungi, and it helps me be a better person and helps me learn more about people.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I love that. And I feel that vibe. And I can read the poet and feel the poet in you just from your bio. When I read the website, I'm like, oh my God, beautifully said, beautifully written. So that's really cool. I love that. That's why I actually use that to quote you, because it's just so well said. And there it is. So thank you. Thank you for sharing those gifts, because it takes, I mean, man, sometimes we all have natural talent. Some of us gravitate towards certain things, and writing, though, is one of those things. Even if you have that talent, it's just like a muscle. It's like you just have to continuously work at it. And I feel like it's beautiful when you run across people like yourself who just have such a way of being able to write things. And as I've heard you speak just on interviews, you also speak with grace too. So it's really nice. And I just wanted to make sure to tell you that, because it's something I'm always looking at with people, because it's something that I'm striving to just always continue to improve with my own self. So just when you see that in other people, it's nice to just acknowledge it. So I enjoy that.
I'm thankful for the plants that help me find my voice, and the plant and the mushrooms that give me the sparks of inspiration and creativity. You know what I mean? Because, and really too, sometimes the poet thing, or dancing in the realm of like the figurative and the metaphor and all of this, to me, it's sort of that women's work in me where I don't just want to, I love talking about phytochemistry. I love talking about scientific journals and all these things, but I also want to evoke a feeling and a core memory and the spark of that genetic memory that we have deep in our bones. Some people say, I don't know anything about herbs. I'm like, did your grandma make you chamomile tea? You know about something, you know? Um, so yeah, the poetic aspect is kind of to bring in that left-hand path, that feeling, that somatic, that the gnosis, you know, that we have with the plants, just as much as we can stack on top of the cool data, you know, and they go together. So
Yeah, they do. And that's one of the other things that really stands out about your work to me, because I really appreciate, I love that you brought up the left-hand path, because I appreciate when people can blend that. And that's something that I really try and do and have really enjoyed. And I've always enjoyed the left-hand path and the right-hand path, and trying to be that middle path, which is like challenging. But I feel like when you can do that and not demonize one or the other, I feel like that's when like the secrets of the universe kind of start to unlock slowly, at least the secrets of the universe that we're meant to know while we're here as living beings, what have you, you know? And yeah, so I love that. And I'd love to actually hear what some of the plants are and mushrooms that have helped you to find your voice. And do you have go-tos when you sit down to write or before you speak, whether it be like in an interview or at a conference or what have you?
Yes. I mean, well, and it's funny. I almost feel like there's something coming in. I'm going to start like this. So sometimes people ask me, how did you get started in herbalism, or what, you know, what sparked it all? And I always think about my birth story. And my mom, she would always tell me, "Oh, you were my orange juice baby." She was just obsessed when I was in my mother's womb. She was obsessed with fresh squeezed orange juice every morning. And I think, oh, orange, citrus. Like citrus has always been in my life this sort of cornerstone plant. I mean, there are many, right? But this cornerstone plant, and simple, right? Because we could talk about all the weird fringe stuff, which I love, but citrus, oranges. I mean, where I grew up in Oxnard, California at the time was tons of farmland. And at a certain time of year, you would just smell like orange blossoms on the breeze. So I bring that into the space all the time, whether it's, you know, some kind of orange blossom hydrosol or just putting some orange peel in my tea of the day to kind of remind me of this, my earthly existence from then to now. And that actually is quite grounding. And you may not look in a herb book and be like, citrus is grounding, but for me, it tells the story of like, is this one of the first flavors I remember, you know? But man, there are so many rockin' herbs and fungi that inspire me and help me get in right relationship with my voice, and finding that the voice of the body, the heart, and the mentals. Lately, I've been really feeling calamus, a chorus calamus, you know, a weird one for sure. Very aromatic and pungent and spicy and potent. And for me, it's kind of anything with that aromatic heat gets me kind of activated. So yeah, I'm going to say today my answer is calamus, but tomorrow my answer may be different. Calamus, yeah, it really sparks in me a sort of present dynamic awareness. And it brings things kind of into this space of coherence where it's easy to be, especially in this day and age, it's easy to be all over the dang place. So it sort of snaps me in.
I like that. Yeah. My good buddy, Chance Garton, he runs the Interverse podcast, and I've done a handful of shows with him, and he got turned on to calamus root through our buddy Kyle of Tippy Canoe Herbs. And Chance now takes calamus before every show, and he explained that kind of same thing of how it helps him to kind of find his voice or be centered before the show, and it things to flow a little bit better. So I like that comparison. And then the fact that I have something to kind of compare that to through another friend of mine who has the same experience. And I think that that's one of the beautiful things about plants, really, for me anyway. And like what you said about orange, you're not going to read in a book that it's maybe grounding, but we have to remember that we're all individuals, and the books are wonderful. And I love books and there's great information in them. But I think things can be lost when we stay too much in that linear way of thinking of lists of constituents, lists of associations or correspondences outside of what we actually feel, or what, what did that plant make us feel when we walked past it, or when we touched it, or when we just took a petal and put it under our tongue? What was the and those are the things that I think are really important. And I think more and more people are kind of getting into the thought of that and kind of leaving the fear behind of, well, did the book say it was okay? Or did the book say that it was supposed to feel that way? Which is really nice to see, actually. And I can just feel that energy opening up, which is really nice.
Well, and that's where, for me, it's so much fun to sort of zoom out and do this sort of dialing in, dialing out with the herbs and the herbal intelligence. Because first and foremost, the way that I look at them is there are relations. But plants are my relations. Plants are my teachers. Mushrooms are my relations. Mushrooms are my teachers. Mountains are my relations. Mountains are my teachers. And oftentimes in the book, it's very, and as you maybe can see, I love books. I have crazy amount of books, but oftentimes we, because of just the way, of the Western philosophy, we've pared things down solely into their parts, and we want things to be memeable nowadays, memeable and ADD, graspable. And I think when we can zoom out and understand, okay, something like calamus, we have a pungent, spicy, aromatic rhizome, right, that loves growing in relationship with water, but it actually kind of has this fiery personality. So it's this very interesting dualism going on. So I'll remind people, because I'm here in the Western United States, we don't have calamus really growing out here, at least not the native species of United States. So, but we do have yerba mansa, Animopsis californica, which also is the spicy, aromatic rhizome that loves growing next to water, and kind of like calamus, doesn't really go to seed anymore because it's been in relationship with people for so long that people just plant cuttings as they move on their trail, right? So I think it's fun, like you're saying, to think in that sense too of what is the personality of this plant? How does it express itself in the landscape, in the terrain? And what could be some interesting analogs, if you will, or similar long lost cousins? And then how do we work that in relationship with who we are, not just as some frozen being, but who am I today in the middle between spring and summer, right? With the mood I have right now, with the food I ate today. Who am I right now, and how do I want to be in relationship to the world around me? So that's how I like to choose plants and be chosen by plants.
Yeah, I can feel that. The presence of mind, which is so freaking important to everything. And I think the plants, because when you can see them that way, they like us to be present. They want us to be present. So I think they enjoy, and they pop up even more when we start to have that mindset of, well, what am I feeling right now, instead of worrying so much about past or future or whatever. And that's just been my experience. So I can appreciate that that's where you're at too. And I'm not surprised. So I want to definitely make sure that we talk about Amanita muscaria mushrooms, because it's one of the first things that really pinged me about your work. Because I mean, more and more people are beginning to talk about this mushroom. I'm finding that it's become a lot more popular. I'm sure you've noticed over the last handful of years. But what I have found is that some people that work with it, they're kind of more hesitant to like have interviews, or they're not wanting to open up to people that maybe haven't experienced Amanita mushroom. This has just been my personal experience, like reaching out to people and stuff. And when I came across your work, I'm like, oh, and she's down to just talk about it. Sweet. You know, and I get it. I get why there can be apprehension around this mushroom, but I want to kind of jump right in and ask you how Amanita has shown up for you in your life, and what was that first spark for you that was like, I gotta go down this rabbit hole.
That's a long ass story. I mean, what I can say is I too was one of those people that was hesitant to speak on my relationship with this mushroom publicly for some time, because, you know, at the core of the work for many of us, the core is do no harm. And there are a lot of urban legends. We can start with that, right? There are a lot of urban legends. This is a poisonous mushroom. This is a toxic mushroom. And indeed, it has compounds that could make you feel not so great, right? It does have cousins that are lethal, right? So there is a sort of aura of danger, and yet this aura of deep intrigue and cultural familiarity with this mushroom. And so I was hesitant for some time until I really got the go ahead, which is a whole long story of how I got the go ahead internally, in my heart, but also through feeling like I had done enough years of research that I felt like I could speak on this with clarity and coherence, and honesty. So, what did you ask me? How does it show up? How does it show up for me in my life?
Yeah. How has it shown? Yep. How has it shown up for you? And what was your first, you know, spark that was like, I got to go down this rabbit hole?
The first spark was, who are my ancestors and how were they engaging with the unseen? Who are my ancestors and how were they engaging in altered states of consciousness for healing, prophecy, connecting with ancestors, etc. And this was way back in the early 2000s when I was writing my college thesis. It was kind of in the woodwork where I'm like, okay, yeah, people talk about it, but people say it's poisonous. There was not really a lot of data on it at the time in the early 2000s. It's like Terence McKenna is talking crap about it. You know, there wasn't really a lot of modern day folks bringing it into the mix. And I sort of set it on the back burner. I said, okay. And I joked about this on another podcast. I was like, it was the literal like elf on the shelf for a long time. And I had other plants and other fungi that were more up for me. And then what really brought it deeply in was this strong sensation some years ago that in desiring deepened connections with my own ancestry and wherever the root to my indigeneity was, I had kind of come to recognize that it never was taken away. It just was hidden in the enchanted realms, in fairy tale and myth. Eastern European is the ancestry that I know about myself. Is hidden in fairy tale and myth. So I started kind of from that perspective when I started re-entering in with muscaria, was let me just pull apart everything I can of where this shows up in fairy tales, where this shows up in old lore about the hag, old lore about the witches. Who are even the witches of Eastern Europe? What were they up to anyways? All of these things. And as I started digging, I started seeing, oh, there's still to this day tons of folk relationship with this mushroom as a medicinal compound, not just as something to quote unquote get high on, get drunk on, all these things. I said, oh, this is really interesting. Let me keep digging. And all of these connections and all of these threads started weaving together. And I saw that my deep intrigue around these sort of edge rider fungi and edge rider plants of it's medicine, it's poison, it's good for you, don't touch it. Like the deep paradox is always kind of what draws me into a thing where I'm like, I need to know more. What's actually going on here? And what I found, and this is maybe perhaps more so on a mythic and intellectual level at first, was a story of a pre-Vatican Eastern Europe, a story of a people who were deeply connected, not just to the land, not just to the spirits of the land, right? Fairies, elves, gnomes, what have you, but also to sensuality and dreaming and visioning. And then I started getting into the chemistry, and I was like, well, what the hell is going on in this mushroom then? and it's one of those things where if you prepare it in the right way, it'll do interesting things. If you don't prepare it in the right way, it'll do not as fun things in your body. And that's true for many of the foods we eat, right? That's true of acorns, right? One of the staple foods of the temperate band of the United States, or the globe, the world, for a long, long, long time, right? It's, you got to prepare it a certain way for it to be rendered wonderful for us, our bodies, right? So what does it do for me? Well, I feel like I'm a devotee to it, you know?
Yeah,
and I'm
I
like,
that.
what can I do for it? But I mean, I could talk about the chemistry and the compounds, and they're fantastic. But I'll say first that it is truly a characteristic, one of the like iconic mycorrhizal mushrooms, meaning that it lives in relationship with trees, it lives in relationship with the forest. It is truly a being of relationship. It is truly a being of interconnected resource sharing. It is truly a being of a knowing and being unafraid of the dark. Because remember, mycelium, right, the quote unquote roots, not roots, but the underground portion of fungi, mycorrhizal fungi, is one consciousness, if you will, spreading out throughout the land, building soil for the forest to grow, right? And then its fruiting bodies, which are basically like its little phalluses, are the things that we see, right, popping up. And we think it's just some individual guy popping up that has these chemicals that are going to do stuff for us. But I'm like, actually, it reminds me of the wisdom and intelligence and interconnected intelligence of the womb of the earth, the darkness, you know. And so what does it do for me in that sense? It makes me have a lot more courage in dark, mysterious, shadowy times, right? And I think we could talk about womb work, we could talk about shadow work, not in the sense of like, there's my shadow over there, right? Or women and wombs. I'm like, no, we're just talking about the darkness, and that we all stand in the full spectrum of colors and tones, and we got to get right with all of it to get right with the world and where it's at right now. So it gives me this sense of courage, yeah, to go there first and foremost, besides anything else, of which there's a million more things I could say. A million more things,
I bet.
truly,
And
truly.
I really appreciate that outlook on it, because as it's giving you courage too, it's given you the courage to do exactly what you're doing right now, which is speak about that. And so it's almost like kind of rooting you on in that way. And I really love your outlook on the darkness and how the darkness is so necessary. And that is what we're talking about when we're talking about the divine feminine, even. And I know that we're going to go into flying ointments and stuff in a little while here, which I cannot not think about the divine feminine when I think about flying ointments, because obviously they're connected to the witches, but I think that there's something even deeper than a witch or whatever. And I think that there's this just deep connection to the wise women of the primordial tradition that we all come from, that this existence basically comes from. And I think that that's what we're tapping into. That's like what you're explaining with Amanita. That's what the flying ointments remind me of. These darker aspects of ourselves is what it reminds me of, because it always makes me think of the mother saying, I've brought you into this world and I can take you out. And that to me is like encapsulates the darkness, because those are the times when you feel dark. You're like, oh my God, she just said that to me. She's right. She can. And then we all have that knowing that, yeah, it sounds crazy, But it's like, no, she can and she will, and she'll do it maybe not even literally, but figuratively by making you feel that, reminding you of like, no. Just remember that you're one small thing in this larger thing, and to, what's the word I'm looking for? Conduct yourself as such, and as we heal, the cliche is then we heal something else outside of us. And that to me is pretty awesome and beautiful, and think of what we're talking about. So, yeah. And, I want to bring something into the fold here, and it has to do with the Amanita. And I'm not sure, are you familiar with tarot, with the tarot system of the tarot at all? Tarot cards?
A wee bit. Just a wee bit. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I've got this tarot card that when I was preparing for our talk today, I was like, I got to bring this card in. So I have a slide. Actually, I'm going to pull it up. So this is the Hermit card.
Oh my God.
I know. I was like, I have to show this to Ash. We haven't even met yet, but I got to show it to her. So this is the Hermit card from a deck called the Visconti deck. And if I'm correct on this, I think it's from like the 17th century. Now I have to give credit to my fiance, Mario. This is from his collection of decks. But when we first came across this card a handful of years ago, it was just like mind blowing. It to me encapsulates what the Hermit is all about, because it's an inward journey, right? He's wearing the Amanita. The Amanita is bringing us inward so we can be better outward. And then just seeing that he has like a double Amanita on and his posture and everything, I really want to just let you see this image and pick your brain. And the other thing that I can't not think about with any mushroom, but particularly the Amanita, is that there is this sacred center world tree imagery within the mushroom, but also just it goes throughout our whole lives, what I'm saying. But his pole, like he has the staff, which to me is just so symbolic of that. And when you have your personal staff and you're holding it and you're holding it strong, almost nothing can phase you. And I think like this card kind of just illustrates a lot of this. And so please go for it if you have any thoughts from seeing this image.
Well, this is my guy right here. This is my guy right here. And exactly, that was of course, I'm like peeking in closer to the screen, is trying to understand what's happening with that hourglass. But the staff is easily, one of the first things that that really stands out to me. The staff, of course, we find not just the symbolic, but the utilitarian importance of the staff, and what does it mean to hold the staff as a conductor of energy, right? And of course, Odin, one of the first characteristic guys I'm thinking of in some of the Norse mythology, Hyperborean mythology, Odin, father of Thor, the lightning god. There's a lot of interesting connections to electricity, voltage, lightning. Of course, we know just in whatever standard modern day science, people say, yes, when lightning strikes in the forest, the mushrooms can grow 4 times as prolifically. There was a study done, I guess, in 2010 or something like this. But we've known this for a long time, this connection with voltage and fungi, and we see it throughout these sort of icons connected to Amanita muscaria throughout planet Earth. And I go through this in detail in my online course, which I have an online Amanita muscaria course, but the spear. So the spear, Odin has a spear that's made by the elves, right? Fashioned, I think the elves made it out of light. It's called the Gungir, right? Or a staff, if you will. And of course, we know Odin, who hung from the world tree Yggdrasil, or the ash tree, as it were, for 9 days or 9 nights to get the knowledge of the runes, the sort of sacred symbolic imagery, symbols, texts. A lot of people connect Amanita muscaria to Odin, but there's more. I mean, there's plenty of these beings who hold these world tree poles or specific wood to conduct their connection and relationship between the magnetism of the earth and the magnetism of the above, the higher places and spaces. So I'm staring at the staff. We could talk about the staff all day. But I also am intrigued, and again, take it or leave it. Some people might be like, Ash, this is a little far-fetched, but his outfit, he's got the blue and the gold. And then, of course, I'm checking out his nice shoes and socks there, his red and white situation on the floor.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they're highlighted. The shoes are highlighted. If you see how the ripple in his cloak is, it's like the artist wants you to look at these shoes for some reason.
There's a lot of discussion around kind of the red and the blue, if you will. We've got the psilocybe mushrooms, which when you touch them, they stain blue if they're fresh. If you didn't know that, people listening. Psilocybe species mushrooms, which are another well-loved psychoactive fungi, and the Amanita muscaria, of course, with its red and whiteness. And this is where we could jump into kind of some of the Tibetan Buddhism, some of the Vedic literature and mythology around who was Shiva? Was Shiva a mushroom? What is Soma? What are these divine nectars of immortality? What is the relationship with people in their costumes of blue, red, white, or even this idea of the manna from heaven that rains down like a soft golden fuzz? I mean, people make all these different arguments of which deity is a mushroom, right? And which mushroom is it? So I think there's always something to be said about the costume that you see someone wearing. Especially in art, especially in sculpture, especially in burials. All of these things to me are not just a haphazard choice. There's a significance of why we represent people in certain garments, colors, and with the tools that they move with. Of course, the hourglass I keep staring at as well, which I think is what it is, but there is like an interesting top to it as well. Anyway. There's a lot going on in there. I'd like to sit with that for some time. And I would like to honestly sit with that, be mushroomed for some time to better open my perception.
Yep, I agree 100%. And yeah, the hourglass, I mean, it just makes me think of like, he's a timekeeper we're all timekeepers, but he's he's a hermit. He's lived, he's been around the block. He's kind of just like he's kind of like the old man time, old man Saturn, that energy. So just being a timekeeper and kind of maybe it's even showing, and I don't know, I'm just spitballing, but maybe it is just showing his witness or his wisdom that he's gained along his travels, because I think of a journeyer, obviously. And then when we're talking about using mushrooms or any psychotropic, plant or drug or what have you, it's like we are going on a journey, and it's undeniable, and it's like this internal journey and it's an outward journey and all these things. But I am so happy I brought this to the table, and I thought to bring it in because I had a feeling that you would have some thoughts on it. And that is just, when I think of the hermit now, it's always been one of my favorite archetypes, but it's always been one of my favorite cards. But that is like my favorite hermit card of all time, because it says it all right there to me. And happy to share it. So super cool.
I'm still spiraling with that right now, because when you said old man Saturn, of course, then I was like, oh my God, Saturnalia, right? And this sort of pre-Christmas holiday that a lot of people think is connected to what we celebrate as Christmas now. Being connected with winter solstice and being connected with Mithras, who wore a cap that looked an awful lot like a Smurf hat. So then again, I could talk all day about the Smurf hat.
Yeah, dude. No, I love it. And actually, even before we joined together here, I already want to prompt, and obviously we'll talk about it, but I would love to have you back on and have my fiance Mario with us, because you guys would like really have a good conversation in terms of just like the symbolism that goes on and where you're at and the things I've heard you say. I'm just like, oh my God, that would be awesome. So yeah, anyway, sorry, I'm adjusting my light. My light just went out. I'm going to open my curtain a little bit. Yes, okay, Amanita. Well, I really think that this is also a mushroom to help us find our true north, which I
Mm,
think also goes back to this staff.
mm,
And
mm,
when
mm,
we find our true north, just like when we know where true north is, we know
mm,
where to go. We know
mm,
the way. And it is like one of the obvious stars that it's stationary. Its navigation tool has been here since we can remember, even if it's just like a visceral ancestral memory. And I
mm,
think that the mushrooms kind of mimic the North Star in some kind of way, if that makes any sense, because I feel like they help us to focus. And you hear all the buzzwords about psychedelic mushrooms, whether they be psilocybin or even the Amanita and all these great mushrooms. But the buzzwords are PTSD, it helped me with anxiety. So it does all these things. But these are the kind of buzzwords that we're hearing. And then, excuse me, it's been put into these clinical mindsets, kind of like same thing what happened with cannabis. What I see coming down the pipeline is kind of happening to the mushroom kingdom in a way when it comes to the psychedelic ones. And especially being up here in the Pacific Northwest, very close to Portland, where the legalization of it is happening, and it's just way more open and stuff, which is wonderful. But it always does make me think about watching what happened with cannabis. And then, I'm sure we could have a whole episode on that as well. But besides these more cliche things about Amanita, what
mhm.
are some of the things that you think should be highlighted about it, like from your perspective? If you could have like one or two things that you would highlight besides all those other things, what would that be?
I mean, it's all connected for sure. I'd say, what I want to say actually is based off. First of all, I love the true north. That phrase, that idea is beautiful, and I'm going to remember that, and I'll have to quote you on that at some point. But this I'll say it like this. I have all these ethnobotany books, right, reading about back when, da 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 da, what are the quote unquote Native American uses of plants, right, which is usually written by outsiders anyway. But I oftentimes find that when we're looking at the way in which plants or fungi are popularly utilized, it is an absolute reflection of the need of the time. So, say you're looking at some 1800s ethnobotany books, a lot of plants are going to be for diarrhea, dysentery, right? Stomach related stuff. Because people were dying from that. Because why? Because refrigeration was different than it is now. Food storage was different than it is now. All of these different things. It was at a time when people's ancestral foods and ancestral food practices were being taken away, right? So, of course, gut stuff is going to be the big concern of the times. That's what we're going to see is that, everything's for diarrhea, right? Nowadays, right, like you said, everything's for PTSD because we're messed up in the head
Yeah.
in industrialized Western civilization. So more or less. So so the cosmic joke is yes, it is all true, and oftentimes plants and fungi have 100 ways that we can work with them, depending on how we prepare them physically, depending on how we prepare them spiritually, and all the nuance therein. So, what are some things I want people to know about Amanita muscaria? Well, we can talk about some of the cool sciencey stuff. I mean, basically, we're working with when it's prepared in such a way, a GABAergic compound in this mushroom, meaning that this is something when it's cooked in its prepared form, it's working in our sort of GABA receptor sites, amongst other things, right? And a lot of people know about GABA in relationship actually to green tea. There are many things that have this chemical compound in it, but what it's doing in our body, at least one of the things it's helping us do is sort of tamp down the excess noise. And that's why people say it's calming or it brings a sense of peace and serenity, is because it's sort of simmering down the excess transmission, right? And again, this is a conversation about voltage, actually, but it's simmering down the excess transmission. Now, whether that's mental noise, right, which there's a lot of in this world, or whether that's literal electric signal and people who have seizures, right? Because there's too much voltage running through, there's too much current running through their nervous system. It brings down, it quiets down the noise. And at a certain dose, people would recognize that as a dissociative sedative, or so it's called, or so it's called. I think that that's kind of a not quite accurate, in my opinion. But it is interesting to think about, is like you said, in this essence of a mushroom that helps us find our true north, or a mushroom that helps us find that sense of Polaris, our inner poleness, right? The ash tree, right? Look up who Ashira is in pre male dominant Hebrew traditions, right? The pole within us. Well, it's kind of that same thing of, who are we when we bring down the noise? Who am I when I bring down the noise? When I bring down the noise of old trauma stories that are looping, right? When I bring down the noise of, am I safe? Am I not safe? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for my body? How does my body respond if it feels not safe? Why do so many people have autoimmune expressions in this time, right? Hyper allergic responses to just living life. Like, oh, I ate a salad, I have to blow my nose. Oh, I stepped outside, there was a jet that made this trail, I got to blow my nose, right? Right. So this idea of what happens when we simmer things down, who are we then? And that's where the shadow work can come in. That's where people are like, oh shit, who am I then? What have I been carrying? That's just some noise, right? So chemically speaking, that's really interesting in that sense, is thinking about this muscarinic receptor site, or cholinergic, rather, sorry, we're dealing with the cholinergic system, right? So we're not talking about serotonin like we would talk about with a lot of popular entheogens of the time. Talking about cholinergic system, which is what through voltage helps us with remembering and memory, or forgetting and letting go. So it's a very powerful, and again, much to say under those umbrellas.
I appreciate all of that. And man, the remembering and the forgetting, how crucial,
right?
How crucial it is to be at peace. I love the thought of it helping to simmer things down, because that is when we feel more at peace, obviously. And as you're saying, the more and more time goes on lately, it's seeming that it's harder and harder for people to do these things. And so we're getting further and further and further away from that true north pole, or that Polaris that we all have. And I think that it's kind of by design, but it also is our natural tendency to want to kind of, have that bit of distraction or what have you, because as we know, you and I, two humans here speaking together, life is hard. It's not, it's like, yes, it can be beautiful. There can be easy times. There's times where you're like, wow, that was a breeze. Oh my goodness. And then there's something that comes up, and it's just that there's this perpetual reminder to keep going. And I think that that's what the mushrooms can do too. And I think that's what that hermit card also encapsulates so well, is that you must keep going. And you have, regardless of what age you are, what you've gone through, you can choose to stop. But then things obviously just become harder and harder and harder to begin when you make that final choice to be like, all right, I guess I got to start again. So anyway, just things that are kind of coming to my mind right now. Right before we move on from Amanita, I have a question about something that I, through research, are just hearing that people are like blending with Amanita, and I want to know if you know anything about Pantherina. Is that what it's called? Okay, so what is Pantherina, and what are the benefits to blending it with Amanita?
So for those who maybe this is their first time hearing about this mushroom in a pharmacon context. Amanita is a genus, right? It's a family of fungi. And underneath that genus, there's all these different species. Many of them we should not ingest at all because we would die, right? So that's always the thing too. Like when we're talking about, when I see somebody and they're like, I'm selling Amanita gummies, I'm like, uh-oh, you got to say muscaria. Otherwise, technically speaking, it could be like a totally not safe to ingest, right? So Amanita muscaria is the genus and species of the red and white spotted mushroom that we all have probably seen somewhere, and we were just talking about. There's all different subspecies of Amanita muscaria. Amanita pantherina is Amanita muscaria's cousin. There are many cousins, right? Very similar chemical compound expression, although some people would say that Amanita pantherina is a much more has much more fuerza. It's stronger. It's stronger, has stronger compounds. Now, again, the joke and the beautiful tricksterness of muscaria and pantherina is that this is a wild mushroom that has never been cultivated before. People don't know how to cultivate it. It refuses to be, I always say, it refuses to be tamed. It must stay wild. That's part of its personality. And because of that, and because it's a mushroom that grows in relationship with trees, that synergetic expression makes it so that there's vastly different chemical compound numbers per mushroom, per fruiting body. So that's another thing people should know is you can't pick one mushroom one day, pick one mushroom the next day and expect them to act similarly, because they could have even from the same patch, completely different expression of their chemistry. Yes, there'll be ibotenic acid. Yes, there'll be muscarine. Yes, there'll be these things, but the levels are going to change. Was how much sunlight was hitting that mushroom, right, etc. Pantherina, so it is said, is much stronger, is what I'm trying to say. So I think sometimes, and of course, there's the sort of mythic and spiritual and symbolic significance of Amanita pantherina as well. And it's a regional thing as well, right? There's going to be more pantherina showing up in different places, like certainly, in South Africa, there's Amanita pantherina. In Mesoamerica, there's Amanita pantherina. So it shows up in different regions of planet Earth, and then has also that different symbolic imprint put upon it.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I asked because, like I said, I've just heard it as pantherina. I didn't even know that it was actually an Amanita mushroom as well. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the clarity.
For sure.
I'm like looking at stuff and watching videos and they're like, yeah, we had pantherina in it. And I'm like, huh, what's pantherina? Okay. So, and I figured you were the woman to ask. So
hey.
Well, right on. I mean, I want to make sure we get to the flying ointments a little bit, because I know you are a maker of flying ointments. You have done lots of research on the history of them, why they are called flying ointments, what's going on. I think it's interesting that we have fly agaric, which is another name for Amanita muscaria. And,
that's right.
Here we are, kind of combining all these things with the Solanaceae family plants. So let's talk about that. What was your first introduction to the flying ointments, and how have they come through in your life, and what do you enjoy about them the most?
Again, this could be an hours and hours of like joyous rambles, but the short version is one of I call him my big brother, one of my mentors in my early 20s. He kept saying, Ash, you're a witch. And I was like, no, I am not. I do not take that title. I've never called myself that. No. And he's like, well, you know that the symbology is with the witch and the broomstick, right? And I said, no, I don't deal with all of that. That's just some Disney stuff. He said, no, you know that the broomstick is the symbolic staff. It's the wooden applicator to apply psychedelic lubes into the mucous membranes. And I said, wait, what? He's like, yeah, your ancestors, that's how they were getting high, right? As they were working with psychoactive lipid-based, fat-based infusions and applying it to the mucosa where it's the most easily absorbable. And as the story goes, the witch inserted the broomstick. It had some sort of whatever belladonna oil on it. She put it in, and the moment of ecstasy, and then she went flying on her broom and saw visions in the night. Right now, there's much debate about where this story comes from. There's a huge amount of debate as to if flying ointments are even utilized in an erotic context. But as an early 20-year-old, I said, well, holy cow, that's amazing. And at that time, you know, I had just gotten out of college and studied ethnobotany, and, you know, I'm a heady kind of person by nature. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, I could put this on my body and have an orgasmic experience with this and learn about plants that way. And it became, I started experimenting, you know, in my early psychonaut days. And I started carefully, right? I was making like Damiana oils and cannabis oils and utilizing them as lubes to learn about plants through my body. And it was just a huge breakthrough again, about a breakthrough about my womanness, a breakthrough about that I had kind of felt like, especially being a psychonaut, you know, in my early 20s, it was like, I need to get my ass kicked. I need to be punished by the mushroom in order to get the lesson. And this was like, actually, it can be fun. Actually, it can be pleasurable. Actually, it can be quite satisfying, right? Now, that was sort of my into that space. And since then, I did a lot of digging again with the same question on my heart that brought me towards the muscaria, which was, what is the story of my ancestors and the plants that they worked with for going beyond, right? Whether that's beyond, deep into the body, or beyond, deep into the celestial spaces and places. So the flying ointments I'm forever indebted to the story, whether it's urban legend or not. It brought me closer to my embodied intelligence and the sort of gnosis, the knowledge of the gnomes, and how to engage with the world in that sort of, what do people call it? Like, what do people call that? Biosexual, like a earth loving, sensual type space.
Yeah.
There's a word for that, but basically just being in a sensual intimacy with the earth, texture, color, scent, right? The glory and the power and the potency of our senses as our inherent scientific instruments that we all have.
Yeah, I love that. And
yeah,
this is bringing me to, I am pumped to hear that your entry to this was doing it even as a lube, because to me, that makes sense. And I have too heard those stories about the broomsticks and all of that, which, I mean, I think it's more metaphor than anything else, you know, it who knows, it may have really happened, and that could be, but I think the metaphor is actually quite beautiful. And, you know, the symbolism of the broom could be a whole other show as well, because I hold it in high regard as a staff, but as like a representation of the divine masculine and divine feminine in one unit that is there, and it's beautiful. And so what this brings me to with your experimentations early on is the thought of, and I don't know if you've ever heard this, but the thought of perhaps before even a flying ointment, before that was a thing, that the women of old who would be considered witches, or I just like the wise women or the cunning folk or what have you, they were actually using their own vaginal fluids as a means to achieve the exact same thing. And that there was this divinity that they knew, and that, I mean, most women, I'm assuming yourself is included in this, understand that divinity that comes from these fluids, whether it's from a male or a female, as well as like menstrual blood and things like that. But and urine is up there too as well, which is, we didn't really get to hit on that, but it is another one that's why I'm so happy to have you here, because I feel like there's so many things We could talk
There's
about,
so many things. Yeah.
oh my God. But what do you think about that concept of the feminine fluids being the actual original means for these women to have these quote unquote psychotropic trips or erotic trips and things like that?
Well, this is the, my sense is that this is the nectar of immortality that many cultures speak on, the Amanita, whatever you want to call it, the Soma. And the kind of funny joke, and this is something I talk about a lot in the Amanita muscaria course on my website, is the chemical compounds in Amanita muscaria synthesized through our bodies heightens the bioavailability of muscimol, one of the primary compounds that people are interested in this mushroom. That's going to come through urine, and presumably that's going to come through female ejaculatory fluids. So now we not only could just talk about the beauty of us as women in our heightened fertility and not being expressed through our wetness, but also that this could literally be a way to pass on chemical compounds to our partner, right? So now this actually becomes a really interesting conversation, not just in theory, not just in symbol, yes, she and her wetness, but like literally, I can send you some chemicals, you, my sweetheart, if you drink from the wellspring, right? And there's we're talking about Odin drinking from the wellspring, Mimir, all these things, right? What is the wellspring? What are we talking about? What are these divine nectars of immortality, right? And when we're talking about immortality, what better than talking about the portal through which, the darkness is accessed through the woman, right? Through her her passageway, which is where this fluid comes from. So there's a million things we could talk about with this notion of our bodily fluids. Female ejaculatory fluids being an amazing conversation, saliva, spit being amazing. Of course, that's a huge component of Mesoamerican medicine works, is how we relate to this idea of spit and mucus. Sheesh. And of course, the urine therapy thing, there's just so much to unpack there as well. And of course, the taboo in conjunction with all of these things. And I like to remind people too, is the word witch, at least as we're told, the Proto-Indo-European root word to witch or Wicca, the W would be pronounced a V, and it's VEG, weg, same root word for vegetable. So sometimes I'm like, in its etymological origin, a witch is just a vegetable lady, right? This is someone, and this is somebody that just works with plants. And we got to remember that this was just as much practical. This is about providing first aid care to your family, as it were, for, the beyond and spellcraft and all of the things, the sort of romanticization of the Disney iconography of witch, right? Or the demonized iconography of witch. But we also have to think about the practicality of, I make herbally infused balms to treat cuts and wounds. Like that's could be a flying ointment too, right? Like I'm making right now a Datura balm for pain relief clients, right? Or for pain relief for chronic pain clients. And that could be considered a flying ointment. Do I recommend people insert it vaginally? Absolutely not. I wouldn't do that on camera. I wouldn't recommend that. But it can be used topically, utilized topically to relieve pain, So there's a certain utilitarian nature of what priests labeled as witchcraft as well, which was just, we're just trying to live.
Right.
Yeah. We're just doing healthcare really.
Yeah, that's a super important distinction too. And I think that, that is another thing that's been kind of sensationalized over the last handful of years, is that witch kind of motif, or the witch talk, or whatever the hell people are hashtagging or whatever. But we lose all of that real solid history of just exactly back to what you said, is literally just living. literally living, and this was their world. That's what they knew, and they worked with what they had. And now we live in an obvious, like, total, like, inversion of that. Actually, it's like it's the same, it's still there, but we live in such a different time that it does then take on this connotation of this kind of Disney hocus pocus sort of thing, which is fun too. I mean, there's fun there. There's visceral feelings that I've gotten since a young child when those things come on, but it's for a reason, because it's deeply seated in all of us, no matter what culture you come from. And that to me is one of the more beautiful parts of it. But I want to give you a recommendation for a woman who I've interviewed a couple months ago, and she's the one that actually brought to the table the idea of this feminine fluids being the actual original root of like the female alchemy. And her name is Ola Woolney, and she speaks really well. It's very well researched. I think you guys would have a good conversation too at some point. I don't know if you interview people or not, but she's wonderful, and she has a really great understanding of it, and just connects a lot of things to Venus versus the moon. Like, so that actually Venus is the original thing, or planetary being or celestial body that was being worshipped, not the moon, and that that's been inverted as well, and that these women were actually Venus worshipers. And when you see the crescent moon, which looks like a crescent moon, it's actually a phase of Venus. And
Venus.
Yes.
Crescent Venus. And so if anybody in the United States ever goes to Coral Castle, which is a very random, weird spot in Florida, this guy, he's basically the story of this guy, I think in the 1920s, he said that he built this castle made out of coral strictly by using Tesla's technology, not the card, like the actual Nikola Tesla man. And there he has these thrones at Coral Castle, and it's there were two crescents, and I remember asking the docent there, I said, what are the crescents on these thrones? And he's like, well, this one is Crescent Venus. And at the time I was researching and really deeply into the electric universe theory. And if anybody has ever looked up the electric universe theory and Thunderbolts project, where they talk about that through looking back at the precession of the equinoxes, you see that a lot of the icons that we utilize for our mythology is actually, there was a time where you had Saturn being one of the brightest bodies in the sky, and then Mars, and then Venus right in front of it, and how they aligned created this different optical expressions, right? So the Venus thing is, that could be an interesting segue into talking about the nightshades or the Solanaceae as well, because a lot of the Solanaceae or nightshade plants associated with the flying ointments have a fiveness about them, right? They tend to have 5 petals or 5 sepals. There's a certain geometry signature that they present with. And of course we know, or at least so it's said, that when you look at the orbit of Venus in its cycle, in relationship to the Earth, it creates a pentacle in the sky, a 5-pointed star. So, and of course, one of the words that's used for flying ointments that, of course, the priests who were taking out the so-called pagan peoples wrote about was veneficium, also with a connection to the word Venus, also with a connection to the word venom, also with a connection to the word vegetable, Wicca, witch. So there's a ton of stuff, not just in the name, but also in the expression of these plants that's connected to some of the Venus stuff. I mean, it can go, we can go with that one. So yeah, I'd like to meet your friend and chat it up.
Yeah, she's a good one. She's up there in the Arctic Circle. She's in Norway. Nice. But yeah, dude, she's a good one. But all these points are hitting all these nerves in me in a good way. So I shouldn't even say nerves. It's just like you're hitting all the jackpots here. It's just like right up my alley. It's really cool. And I even wrote down I wrote the 5 petal connection as well in
Mm.
my notes, because I always think about that. Because a lot of times too, the Solanaces are also related to Saturn. You know, there's that correspondence that I see that comes through with Saturn. But as I
Mm.
research them more, or I work with them more, or I just observe them more, I see so much more Venusian properties. And the same thing comes through for me with like mugwort and stuff. And so that's why I think it's interesting. There's total obvious moon correspondences with mugwort. No one can deny that. But as I've like through my years of journeying with mugwort, now I'm just getting to this place where I'm like, man, I see that Venus real strong. And that 5 points comes through again. And then obviously we have the crone, and we have just like that earthy, almost like earth hag sort of like, you know, medicine that's going on there. And that journeying, taking us back to the dark, taking us back to the womb, taking us back to that root of why we are who we are. So anyway, but as we both said, we could go and go and go.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, we're coming up to the top of the hour here, and I want to allow you, if you have any closing thoughts for the audience, and then make sure to let everyone know again where they can find you. And I also know you have a Patreon page as well. So if you have any courses or anything, also, you've mentioned your Amanita muscaria one, but anything else you'd like to promote, the floor is yours, my lady. So thank you so much. I really appreciated your time. This has been awesome.
Oh, well, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I feel like, oh my God, it's just the tip of the iceberg. That's why it's sometimes so hard. And I can be a rambler, right? So it's so hard because now I want to talk about mugwort and all these things, right? But I'm grateful to be here, grateful to share and connect with you, and you, whoever is listening. And closing thoughts. I think, if anything that could be expressed through how I share my work and joy and love of the world, if anything can be expressed through that, it's this spark of curiosity to move beyond the polarization of these times and recognize that it is through the darkness, and it is through these portals, through the sort of, how do I want to say, transcending the labels of what is poison and what is medicine, and what do those even mean? Whether we're talking about plants, whether we're talking about fungi, whether we're talking about pharmaceutical agents, whether we're talking about cultural ideologies, how can we get right with the pluralism therein, and then move through that in a creative way where we're connected to our sense of our pole, right? Our sense of sovereignty, our sense of I-ness, and our sense of interconnectedness at the same time. So my hope and prayer is to spark that and just get people excited and curious about the inversion, as you said, the uniqueness of the times that we're in. And to remember that we are robust creatures, and we are pretty good at transmuting transmuting things. So anyway, I talk about all of this and more in my in my coursework. So I have a bunch of stuff on my website. I think in the themes of what we've been chatting about here, folks may be interested to check out my work on Amanita muscaria, my work with on the flying ointments. So I have a class called Mary Mushroom on my website. I have a class called Balms and Broomsticks on my website. And I also think the Forbidden Fruits course people would really vibe with, especially in talking about kind of this women's wisdom, the Venus stuff, looking at Ishtar and the pomegranate, and what are the forbidden fruits anyway? Why were they forbidden in the first place? Who said that anyways? But there's a whole bunch on there. So y'all are invited to check that out on my website, blacksagebotanicals.org. That's also my IG handle, Black Sage Botanicals. And I also have a Patreon page, which is fun, where I do monthly live streams, and we can talk about all the taboo things that Instagram won't let me talk about. What else? I've got some actual public things happening this year too. So I'll be at the Good Medicine Confluence, a fantastic herbalism conference in Colorado in July. I will be at MycoFest on the East Coast in August. I will be at Big Psych in the Midwest in August. I will be at Oklahoma Fungi Fest, whenever that is, in October, and there's probably going to be more. But I'm out. I'm getting out there. I Hermit Ash am actually getting out there too.
Awesome. I love hearing all that, man. You deserve all those opportunities to be presenting this information, because more people are getting interested. More people need people like you who have understand it on a really deep level, because we live in the age of information where it's just frivolously kind of thrown out there, as we talked about in the beginning. You know, knowing that there was an apprehension because you wanted to make sure. And I feel like there's a lot of things that are just thrown out there before they're known, and that's where we get on shaky ground. So I appreciate that sentiment on, and just how you carry yourself with this information. So yeah, well, best of luck with all the journeys, all the conferences, and moving forward. I look forward to continuing learning from you, and hopefully talking to you again at some point, because this was wonderful. And as you said, just the tip of the iceberg. So thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure you check out all of Ash's work over at blacksagebotanicals.org. You can also find links to her social media and her link tree down in the description below. And as always, michelleshealinghome.com for all things healing home. Thank you to all the patrons out there. You guys are much appreciated. All your support means so much to me and goes a long way over here. So thank you. Patreon.com/thehealinghome for anyone who'd like to join me over there on Patreon. And a handbook for herbal and natural cat care is now and still available over on my website. For $11, you can purchase and download this beautiful ebook, and you can have it on hand for you and your cat friend. This is a wonderful introductory guide to help you introduce herbs and natural remedies into your cat's life. I also go into tips on how to incorporate things like DMSO, MMS, proper diet, healthy cat litters, you name it. I have it in there, and it's all based on my own personal experience working with our cat Carl to help him live his best life using herbs and natural remedies. You can sign up for my newsletter over at michelleshealinghome.com under the newsletter tab. There you can also find my full moon offering newsletter archives, so you can look at past issues if that tickles your fancy. Full moon offering number 45, my mugwort skincare. This one is a great one, and it's been selling out pretty quickly. I have 3 bottles left of my Earthy Glow facial oil, 3 bottles left of my mugwort and rose facial toner, and I've got about 10 bars of my mugwort earth hag soap left. So you can check all that out over on my website as well, and my online store, if you want to get your hands on some of these. And up on the screen is my current menu along with all the prices. And just want to also remind people that I am available for custom orders and bulk orders, particularly bulk orders of soap. So if you're wanting to maybe buy an entire batch of soap so that you can have it on hand for a prolonged amount of time, hit me up at michelleshealinghome.com or michelleshealinghome@gmail.com. Full Moon Offering newsletter. Issue number 46 will be dropping on June 21st, right after the solstice. Next week, join Mario and I as we talk about urine symbolism. If you've been watching The Healing Home for a while, you may have noticed that we have been on a urine kick, because we have been diving into the world of urine therapy, and it has been quite profound for us. So we thought what would be fun is to look at the symbolism of urine. You know, what does it mean? What are the alchemical traditions? What are some literal symbols that represent urine? And we're going to get into it on the 11th of June at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So come and join me and Mario as we dive into that one. So Mario has the Pleiadians presentation still up and available. It's on YouTube, and it is a wonderful, wonderful expose on this wonderful star cluster, and it's a beautiful presentation. He really stepped up all of his designs, and the slides of this presentation is just great, and he really comes to the table with some interesting information on these stars and an inversion that may interest some people out there. The Fool from Symbolic Studies is now available over on patreon.com. Also, you can sign up for this membership on symbolicstudies.com. All the support tiers start out at $5 and go upwards from there. But this is the first of multiple videos and talks that Mario is going to be putting out about the major arcana simply through Symbolic Secrets, which is a Patreon or membership exclusive offering. So head to symbolicstudies.com if you want to check out any of the things we're talking about here or sign up for a membership, maybe pick up a print of Mario's, schedule a study session or a tarot reading, or maybe you're interested in some graphic design work. You can do all of that over at symbolicstudies.com. You can also head over to patreon.com/symbolicstudies if you'd like to support Mario over there. And with all that said, folks, that is going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you again for being here. Really appreciate you guys being around and hanging out to listen and learn some new things. So until next time, take care out there.